Hi, folks. Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm doing yet another edition of the Freelancer Q&A series that I've been doing for a long time now on this channel. Pardon me. Today, I'm actually going to start weaving in something that was a theme towards the end of the days of my Dead Tech YouTube channel. I mean, like, it still exists. I just haven't put anything there in a while. And what I was doing at that time was niche case studies, I was calling it. So I had been creating content about identifying niches and filling niches. And I had a bunch of people write in, and I feel bad about this in retrospect. Like, I said, hey, send me your niche ideas and I'll evaluate them. And I did that for some of them, but I still have a decent backlog of them. So I think what I'm going to do is start to weave those in, because is this a good niche actually does seem like a pretty relevant freelancer Q&A type of thing. So that's what's going to happen here. I have in my notes here the actual question. So I'm going to read that verbatim because I think that's important for these. So the question overall here is improving code performance, like you write code and how well it performs, is this a good niche? So the person in question says, hey, Eric, I have a question about a good niche. I really enjoy working in the domain of performance engineering. That means I really like to understand how different styles of programming influence the performance of your code, how you can figure out what the bottlenecks are and what to do in order to speed them up. This includes both low-hanging fruit, inspecting the program through a profiler and figuring out why the program is slow, and more complicated program rewriting to make it faster. I focus mostly on C and C++ on Linux. The good, I really enjoy this domain and feel motivated to learn a lot. There is a lot to learn, and there are many things that you can do in order to speed up your program. The bad, engineers that are good at performance are not that hard to find. So this person was then curious as to what my take on this would be as a niche, improving programming or improving the performance of code, usually in C or C++ on Linux. So I guess off the cuff, the techie in me says, well, if you're going to focus on performance, C and Linux isn't a bad place to do it. It does seem like there might be room there to get into the space of, like, I mean, this was early in my career. I did this kernel module programming and like real-time embedded type stuff. So you could probably, make some headway there. But I want to talk about this as a niche. So, and I don't know if I've done this in a video before. If I can dig it up, I'll put it up on YouTube, but I might have just done that for no reason because I might not have. But I have definitely, in my travels on various blogging sites or wherever talked about this. This is the way I personally define and distinguish niche from specialty. So to me, a specialty is kind of your secret sauce. Like, what do you do? What are you good at, et cetera? It's about you. The niche is about the buyers. So I think of a niche as an unmet need in the market. And that's really all about the potential buyers of the offering. It doesn't have anything to do with the person filling it per se. I remember years ago writing this blog post to illustrate an example, which is imagine that like suddenly all like radio frequency communication for like cell phones and so on and so forth stopped working. And the only way that you could communicate over long distances anymore was to have a like one of those old time corded phones like plugged into a landline, hypothetically. If that reality just came to pass and the laws of physics changed, and you happened to be a person that for reasons I could not fathom had hoarded just a warehouse full of old corded phones, there would suddenly be a huge demand and you would be able to fill a niche. You weren't good at anything. Like, there's nothing special about you. You just, for some reason, have all these phones on hand. So you would have the ability to, sell those to people and fill that niche. That doesn't mean you're a competent corded phone manufacturer or distributor or anything like that. You might be terrible at filling the niche, but at least in the beginning, before anybody else catches up to you, you wouldn't have to be good at it. You would just have to be able to scratch that itch among the constituents. I guess another, kind of macabre example of this would be like if you go and you price gouge for like supplies after some natural disaster, like you come down with bottles of water, you don't have to fill the niche efficiently or anything, or even humanely. I mean, this would be a horrible thing to do, but you would be down there filling it inefficiently by selling people water at outrageously marked up prices. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor that point too much. The thing I'm trying to drive home here is the niche you're filling doesn't really have a lot to do, especially early on, with whether you're good at filling it or not. So the niche is about them and their demand. The specialty is about you and your skills. And the reason I just harped on that a whole bunch is because if you go back and like rewind, if you're not watching this live, and listen to me reading that description, it was all about the person asking the question. So that's not a niche. You're in here talking about the tech stacks you're using, what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, et cetera. And that's all fine. You know, it's you do want to do something for a living that appeals to you, but it doesn't really have much to do with a niche. So that's kind of the first thing to understand there is the way you're talking about this. We haven't really identified whether there's a niche or not. So in order to think about that, what we'd have to do is say, like, is there demand for somebody that's maybe more knowledgeable than average, or let's even say expert? I'm not sure what your skill level in this is. Is there demand for a programmer that's particularly good at debugging or troubleshooting or assessing performance issues? Yes, I would say that there is a demand for that of sorts in specific tactical situations that's kind of ephemeral. So, you know, anytime there's some program that's running slower than it should, there's theoretically demand for somebody to come and improve the performance, assuming there's like some material economic reason that it matters whether this runs performantly or not. So yes, there's going to be a lot of demand for it. But the other side of this is there supply for this? And the answer to that, again, is yes, tons of it everywhere. Literally everybody who writes C or C++ code, well, maybe not quite everybody, but I think just about everybody that writes this type of code would describe themselves as somebody who, if pressed, could dig into and troubleshoot performance. They might concede that they weren't the best person in the world to do that. But if you took some C code and you showed it to the average C programmer and asked, do you think you could come up with ideas for how to improve the performance of it and potentially execute those? I imagine the overwhelming majority of those people would say yes. Now, that doesn't mean you, the question asker, aren't better at it than them, but it means that there is an awful lot of supply competition for this sort of service. So you're in a market where there is demand and there's a lot of supply. That's the first thing working against you in terms of trying to identify a niche and fill it here. It is not an unserved segment of the market by any stretch of the imagination. It might be underserved if the people who are currently doing performance improvement stuff aren't doing it very well or aren't getting the job done for whatever business goal this pertains to. But the thing that I would also caution against here is I've been saying that there is a demand, but it's ephemeral and situational. It's also kind of opaque. So let's take the example of, you know, I'm just thinking back to the days I was doing work at like mail sorting and manufacturing companies. So there, I was doing some work at Valpak, actually, that used to send out the mailers, like on the systems that they used for that. It was like real-time programming. I was working on the controller machines that controlled those like huge assembly line operations. So let's say that they're having a problem in the plant and there's the code that I'm responsible for. And I've done a bad job. Like I haven't programmed this to be quite fast enough. What would most likely happen is, because, you know, I would go on site there and work on some of these systems and improve them and so on and so forth. If there were a performance problem where, you know, the output wasn't good enough or something, so there's a real material problem there for Valpak. Trouble is, imagine this scenario. The kind of person, like the VP of engineering in my company, wouldn't have been out looking for somebody that was a C++ or C programmer that was good at performance. What they would do instead, if, you know, I were to surface this and say, hey, I'm having trouble getting these machines to be performant enough, they probably would have asked around to other engineers, maybe somebody more senior on my team, to lend me a hand. And almost certainly that need would have gone and stayed in-house. And that's assuming we even surfaced it up to somebody in leadership. It's unlikely that would have happened. I probably, if I had been out of my depth, would have more likely gone to one of the more senior people working there and asked for advice, and that's all the further it would have gone. So what I'm getting at is, if you have these problems within an organization, they very likely aren't even making it onto the radar of somebody that could hire you. And if they were to make it onto that person's radar, that person would almost certainly turn around and trust their own internal folks to do something about it, because that's what they're getting paid to do. The other part of this is that I haven't really even mentioned yet, because the Valpak example, if things were slow there, they would have been losing money. It might be that there's, yeah, you know, this is slow, but absolutely nobody in a profit and loss sense in the business is feeling any kind of pain. You could think, I mean, like, not to be cynical, but imagine the software like at the DMV or something, oh no, the DMV software is underperforming. The DMV workers are slower. What are you going to do? Go to the other DMV? Like, it doesn't really cost anyone anything. So yes, it's underperforming. Yes, some people could theoretically recognize it as a problem, but there's no profit motivator whatsoever to spur anyone to do anything about it. So what you're contending with here with this prospective niche is, number one, there is a borderline infinite supply for the market of people that could try to do something about it. Number two, there isn't a lot of visibility of this as a problem worth paying for to people who have the money to pay for it. There's a lot of indirection going on there before somebody who is in a position of authority was like, we have a performance problem in this particular module in our code base, and we don't have the chops internally to do anything about it. I need to go and find myself a C expert that is much better at C than all these C programmers I have here. And I don't want to hire that person. I just want to pay them to temporarily be an expert. Now, if I'm making that sound far-fetched, it's because it is, but it's not inconceivable. It just makes your sales and marketing kind of a Dickensian slog. So imagine that you're trying to market to people who are having this problem. The kind of person that's going to hire a consultant, maybe as a director of software, maybe a manager, but probably a VP or somebody. And you're going to have to somehow make that person aware that they're having a business problem, and that problem is caused by something somewhere in their code. And it's something somewhere in their code that nobody that they're paying to be a software engineer can do anything about. That's a lot of gaps to bridge. Now, if you are really committed to this, I made some notes down here because it does remind me of a situation. There is a path to execute this. So what I would recommend there is becoming super knowledgeable. So you had said mostly C and C++. I would, number one, narrow it to those only, C or C++ on Linux, and maybe just pick one. I do stuff with C on Linux, but then I would do something even more specific. Like maybe there's a specific distribution of Linux, or, a specific application like real-time systems or something like that. And maybe there's a set of tools that are fairly widely used in the marketplace that you start to focus on. That might at least start to give you a fighting chance. What you would then need to do is create a pretty serious name for yourself in the industry. So what I'm mentally mapping to here in my head is a friend of mine, Thorben, who runs Thoughts on Java, but he's a Hibernate performance expert. And he, over the years, built a bunch of courses about performance in Hibernate and how to use that ORM. And he is, I imagine, considered one of the foremost experts in the world on this. He has a site with all kinds of courses, and he will do consulting and teach people how to do this. And I know him personally. I mean, we're friends, and I've known him for years and years, and I know that he spent a long time before he even went off on his own. He was building up this expertise in this particular technology, and then he made the transition to being an independent, selling courses on that. And now it's put him in a position where he can consult or be called in to do training of engineers to do this. So it is doable. But what I'm getting at is you would have to follow a path like that, where you are creating an incredible amount of content to establish yourself as an expert, to get yourself more positioned visibly in the market than just about anybody else who's an expert in this, and then parlay that into leads and sales. And what I've just described there is absolutely sales and marketing on like so difficult, like expert, whatever, like you're never going to succeed in this game mode, above expert. I forget what, I'm thinking of Civilization, where they had like more and more levels, and it was like emperor level or something. So it is the hardest marketing and sales and positioning that you can do, which is to try to become known as the best technician in the world at something, and then hope other people out there, or convince other people out there to think that matters. Not that you can't do it, it's just, wow. So if I'm thinking about what I would do instead of, maybe this type of grind, and by the way, I should clarify here, this isn't to knock anyone, like especially Thorben, for what they're doing. It's more like, I think people come to that less by saying, you know what, I need a niche, so I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to become positioned as the foremost expert in it. I think it happens more organically where the topic is interesting. They write about it, they become known, they build up a following, they maybe start to monetize it. So it's this more gradual path. If what you're doing is saying, I want to pre-identify a niche and go into it, this is not how I would do it. If you happen to have built a following and credible expertise and give talks on something already, you could capitalize on that prior work. So anyway, if you haven't done those things, here's what I would recommend doing instead. So first of all, I would make it a point to trace, let's call it poorly performing C code on Linux to business problems, however you can. So the idea that there is code and the idea that it could be faster isn't particularly compelling. You would need to think in terms of, when does code performance matter? So like, I mean, in my world where we're doing a lot of content marketing and SEO type stuff these days, one place I can think that performance of code is a real business problem is site performance, where you're not doing well in Core Web Vitals and Google deranks your site. So that is definitely a business problem related to code performance. Not going to be super relevant in C. I doubt there's a lot of websites, CMS built in C on Linux. I guess you never know. But, it could be something like, I'm just thinking of the kind of systems that might run this code. If you had like, I don't know, warehousing systems where, delays in the execution of some code was causing delays that delayed production or transportation and logistics concerns, things like that. Maybe you had a shop where the POS system was based on some software that was running and they were losing customers or losing turnover rate because the system was slow. So I don't know exactly what, but that's the idea, is try to find instances in your travel of where this performance has caused a business problem. And I mean, the closer you can trace it to lost money or lost opportunities for revenue, that's really where you want to be. Not so much, the software, if it were faster, like more people might buy it because it would seem like it was better performing. I mean, you could make that argument, but I think it's much easier if you can trace it to really tie it to economic outcomes. So I would look all over the place, just keep asking why. So this software is performing badly and that's a problem. Why? Well, because, these users are being delayed in using it and they're having to wait. Like, why is that a problem? Who cares? Well, whenever they have to wait, like this happens. So you just keep asking why until you get to, because so-and-so is losing money. So find as many of those as possible and kind of document them, keep track of them, and then start to look for patterns. Do they, is there some kind of common flavor of Linux that they're running on? Is there some kind of common industry that they're in? Is there some kind of common person that's using these pieces of software that's feeling the loss across the board? So once you start to identify the patterns, now you're nibbling at the edge of a niche. So you have this problem that is caused by performance, and there is a pattern, there is a situation in which this comes up over and over again and is a problem. Then I would also be kind of keeping an eye on, is anyone really solving this problem? Or is it just solved by telling the engineers in question to engineer harder or something? So you want to identify these patterns that have an actual business outcome associated with them. And you also want to identify situations in which nobody's really doing much of anything about it. Now, when you do this, you start to get into the realm of having a niche. So that's kind of abstract, but I mean, there are situations where you could really kind of get in there, especially where, the engineers of the organization might not exist or be in a position to do anything. So for instance, let's say you're doing C and Linux, maybe you could find companies where they used to do stuff on that platform, but they all migrated to JavaScript or something, and they have some old legacy stuff that's on C and Linux, and it's having performance or other problems. Well, now you're talking about an organization where if that software is wheezing and creaking and having problems, they don't have anyone internally to solve it. That's a good situation to be in. You could also look for, I mean, this probably wouldn't come up a lot in C, but if you had situations where they'd hired a consultant or like an app dev body shop to do something, and that company handed it off to the client, and then the client didn't have anyone on staff to maintain it, things like that. So it's really about the business outcome, identifying patterns, and then making sure that nobody's really scratching that itch, in the way that you could. And I don't mean that you're better. You're rarely going to wander into some market where absolutely nobody's doing anything about a problem. It's just often more like people aren't doing anything about it in quite the best of ways. Like an example that's highly relevant for us at the moment is we've had more and more clients ask us about what's called technical SEO lately. And that's historically something I haven't really enjoyed being involved in. But the more I've started to look at what other firms were doing, the more it was kind of like, oh, well, we could, help you with that. And what I've discovered is the overwhelming majority of firms doing SEO want to do it in a way that's kind of good for their bank statements, which is I want to charge monthly recurring revenue. So you want to do SEO with us, that's going to be however many thousand a month and minimum term of 12 months. And because that's kind of the incumbent model for companies that just like kind of want a one-time or one-off project, it's pretty frictional because they go to all these potential providers of the service and they all want minimums and like monthly spend. And so if you're one of these companies, it's not that there's nobody in the world that would do a one-off SEO project or whatever, but it's not the common thing. So if you went in there and you were to do something like that, zig when other people zagged or something, that's what I mean about a niche. So back in the, code performance world, it would be, selling at a flat rate when other people charged by the hour, or working on systems that other people didn't work on, or working on systems where the other people working on them maybe had the wrong skill set. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for, is sort of like an inefficiently / underserved market. And then finding ways to delight them and make them happy. And kind of most importantly, make or save them money. So, in the end, I think that you have a valuable skill, a specialty, if you will. Being able to make close to the metal code perform better is certainly something that has economic ramifications. You just need to go out and find what those are, who cares about them, and how their needs aren't being met. And I know that sounds like a lot, but if you do listening tours, if you start to kind of dig into past projects and ask the people involved, like, hey, do you have a few minutes? I'd be curious to know, like, what exactly was, how was this performance issue impacting your bottom line, that type of thing. So if you start asking enough questions and documenting enough conversations, you will start to see those patterns. I promise. It just takes some practice, and it's a skill that you have to acquire. So hopefully that is helpful for those of you watching out there. Maybe I was going to throw out the offer like, hey, if you have ideas and you want me to evaluate a niche, by all means, feel free to ask. And I do tentatively extend that offer, but I feel like we ought to let me get some momentum on doing a few of these. I still have some in the backlog, so I don't know that I want to be throwing it out there to, well, you know what, if you have a question, I'm sure people have been waiting 3 years, can wait a little longer. I can kind of like slide new questions into the front if you are curious. So feel free to ask. Forget I sort of waffled on that. Anyway, that was not a strong ending to the video. I will try to do better next week, and I will catch you all next time.